Asahi, thank you so much for agreeing to Fireside Chat with Health Venture and such an important multi-layered topic. Before we get into the thick of it, however, I want to share a bit about your most impressive background with our listening audience. You are the Global Head of Corporate Engagement and President of the Goldman Sachs Foundation, a member of the Management Committee, Global Diversity Committee, and the Sustainable Finance Steering Group. Prior to assuming your current role, you were the Co-Chief Compliance Officer of Goldman Sachs and Company and Global Head of Investment Banking Division Compliance and had responsibility for conduct risk. You joined Goldman Sachs in 2006, was named Managing Director in 10, and was named Partner in 2018. Prior to joining the firm, you were an associate at Cleary, Gottlieb, Steen, and Hamilton, where you worked in the New York and Frankfurt offices. You graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Swarthmore College and earned a JD from Columbia University, where you were a Harlan Fiske Stone and an SKE scholar. Asahi, on behalf of Health Venture Capital, I'd like to warmly welcome you to the Leaders Summit, and I deeply appreciate you carving out time in what I know to be a very busy and challenging schedule.
Donna, I want to thank you and Health Venture Capital for having me. It's terrific to be in conversation with you.
Well, thank you. And so to set the stage, let's talk about the case for investing in women and underrepresented groups. Statistically speaking, 33% of startups were founded by women of color. 50% of all women-owned businesses are led by women of color. Female-led startups make 78 cents on every dollar compared to 31 cents by their male counterpart. Yet Black and Brown and entrepreneurs and fund managers are grossly underfunded. From your perspective, what is that attributable to?
Look, I think there are a number of factors that it's attributable to. I think one is network. Diverse founders don't have the networks as non-diverse white founders, majority founders do. And the networks very often lead to greater funding for their companies. So I think that's a huge part of it. Look, bias is a part of it as well, that people may not be willing to take, quote unquote, a risk on a Black or brown founder as they would otherwise. I'm known for speaking plainly, and I have to say that is a factor. So I think network's one. I think there's conscious and unconscious bias, I think, is another factor as well. I think a third part of it is sometimes minority founders are bringing to market products that perhaps majority individuals may not use. And so really an understanding of the products that they're looking to bring to market and how wide that circle of use is may just be, frankly, I think a bit of an education that needs to be done around why this particular product is really needed in the market. And I think part of it is really attributable to as well, sort of their underinvestment leads to more underinvestment in terms of getting more capital. So it's this compounding impact of not being invested in, then they don't have the resources, sometimes the personnel, to really be able to grow their company. And so those are some of the things that Goldman Sachs has really been investing in through our 10,000 Women and 10,000 Small Businesses platform, which is really to give these entrepreneurs the kind of network and capital that they need to grow, because we know that they've got something special.
You know, you make some very interesting points and some very poignant ones that it's clear that entrepreneurs what they're missing, specifically lack of access to capital, advocacy. But what are the investors missing? I mean, why are they reluctant when they know that in the Black and brown communities there are the markets are fairly significant, the spend power is fairly significant. What do you think the investors are missing?
I think, look, certain investors don't take the time to know exactly the things that you've just articulated, Donna. And so what I think they're missing is a tremendous opportunity where people are like, there's a lot of capital out there. I'm trying to figure out where to invest it. I think part of what they're missing is the lack of education around that market. And so I think having more information around how large the market is, how many products they have, why that penetration could really be transformative in terms of their own investment potential, I think, and being open to it, right? Because someone, you could lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, right? So you want to make sure that on the investor side, people are being open to, give me a great opportunity, which generally, if I talk to investors, that's what they'll say. They'll be like, you bring me a great opportunity and make the case case for me. That's what I'm looking for. That's what my day job is. That's what I'm about. And we say, look, we've got great opportunities. Let's bring them to you and let's see how, whether you're able to, sort of really dig in and understand why this particular individual market is really worth betting on. And we're seeing that more and more, but it's slow going.
Slow going, yeah. Your CEO has boldly stated that Goldman Sachs will not take a company public without diversity on its board. Why has Goldman Sachs made such concerted efforts in the commitment to increase representation within its clientele? What was the impetus?
It is a clear business case for why this is important. David Solomon at Davos a couple of years ago, when he went out with that particular statement, it sort of hit the press. I remember I was sitting at my desk and the TV's on all the time, and there he was, and the statement was on all the time. But if you look at the data, it's sort of, surprising companies hadn't come there before, namely companies with diverse boards perform better. Right? They perform better in terms of their P&L. They perform better in terms of getting greater market share. They perform better overall. And so when you think about that, you'd sort of say, well, if I'm looking to make the best investment, I want to make sure I've got the best team in place. Then this should be one of the factors that you're looking at. How diverse is the board of the company? And so we saw, as we dug into it, that the facts were there to support that these were actually going to be better investments if the boards were more diverse. And we thought, look, certain things in the world, happen on their own. And other things you have to really push to make that progress. And Goldman Sachs is committed to racial equity. It's committed to gender equity. And we knew that we had to go out with something bold as it related to that. And David Solomon, if anything, is very much committed to, if you make the case to him why it's important, he'll say, let's do it. And so we did that. And he made that statement. We've committed to doing it. And we're going to, in the middle of this year, not IPO a company that doesn't have at least 2 diverse board members, of which one must be a woman. So that is, that's the progression, along that from the original statement of 1 to now 2 and 1 being a woman.
It's interesting because, I was thinking about how that statement impacted the business community overall. I was wondering whether or not it was viewed as philanthropy, or it's just the right thing to do, or is it essential? Help us unpack that a little bit more.
It was interesting because there was a variety of reactions, not that it was philanthropy, because the way that I think David and others, really described the thought process around it, it's sort of, as I just articulated, really hardcore in terms of, let's look at the numbers around how companies with diverse boards do and how those companies fare over time. And so I think people were surprised for sure. There was some discussion around whether, should a corporation be doing this? Other people were concerned about, how much business potentially the firm would lose as a result of it. And, none of those things have come to fruition. Companies, clients have come to us and said, we want to have greater diversity on our board. Would you be able to partner with us? Would you be able to help us? Which is fantastic, because that's what we're about. The business principles of the firm, clients' interests come first. And so we've actually launched an effort called internally the Spotlight effort, Donna. And that effort is around really being a hub for amazing, diverse potential board members. Maybe they've never been on the board of a public company before. Could we give them greater education, greater tools? Maybe they've never come to the attention of a board before. And we'd say, look, there's this fantastic person, think about it. And so we've now become sort of an incubator, a hub, if you will, for a new generation of diverse board members. And we've placed a number of them, over a dozen of them on boards already through the program. So that's been, I don't think we anticipated that when we went out with the policy. And it's always great. I love the job that I get to do working at the firm, because you learn and you grow as part of it. And certain things are unexpected. And you say, well, if people are coming and asking us, why don't we figure out ways, and we've got pipeline of terrific women, why don't we, build upon that? And that's what we've done. And there's a group now of individuals that are dedicated to working on exactly this.
Wow, that's amazing. In the last decade, Goldman has launched signature programs specifically targeting women, entrepreneurs, and small, diverse business owners. I'd like you to tell us a little bit more about these programs, and more importantly, what do you foresee 5 to 10 years from now? Do you sort of want to be out of this business of having to have special programs or signature programs? Tell us a little bit about that.
That's an interesting question, Donna. So I think about it a couple of ways. So we launched 10,000 small businesses, as you correctly noted, our signature program in 10,000 women. And just so very briefly at a high level, 10,000 small businesses, think of it as sort of Wall Street meets Main Street. So it's a mini MBA free of charge to small business owners across the country. Warren Buffett and Mike Bloomberg are the co-chairs of the Advisory Council of 10,000 Small Businesses. They've been with the program for 10 years. Warren does not do graduations, but he speaks at 10,000 Small Businesses graduations, and we're so incredibly honored that he does that. But it's really around the commitment to small businesses in particular. And I want to say, when I say small businesses, Donna, I mean small. This is your barber shop. This is that restaurant that makes those amazing cupcakes, you know, that the kids and the family on a special event always want to go to. You know, so it's the blowout dry bar. It's businesses that make a community a community. It's businesses that know your name and you know their name, and that, you know, have lollipops at the front door when the kids come in. So real heart of America small businesses across all 50 states, Puerto Rico, and the District of Columbia. And we work with the businesses. They take the course. They get opportunities to get access to capital, which is, and some of them get capital through the firm as a result of it as well. And then here's the thing, and it's back to that magic of the unexpected. We hadn't anticipated how many of the businesses would start doing business with each other. And it gets back to your first question around network. And so we found that upwards of 80% of the businesses, having gone through this intense, immersive experience with each other of taking the course, stepping out of their business, instead of working in their business, starting to work on their business. And they bond as a result of that. And they go back, and all of a sudden we were hearing, you know, Molly's doing business with Susan and John and Jake, and they kept in touch, and they're selling each other's products. And we said, well, this is fantastic. So we started building upon that as well. 10,000 Women is our signature program that's for developing markets. So Nigeria, Brazil, India is one of our largest markets for 10,000 women. We're almost at 100,000 women that, even though that's the name of the program, we're almost at 100,000 women that have taken it. You know, to the last part of your question around, you know, is my hope that we get out of the business of needing to do it? You know, I'm hopeful, but I'm also pretty realistic. I think that in 5 years, we're still going to need to do it. I think in 5 years, you know, one of my worries, and I've said this before, is whether some of the awakening that we're seeing is a false dawn. And I hope it's not a false dawn, because this country and the world will be greater with all of these efforts being sustained and having them grow. That being said, I've been doing this for a number of years, and I'm realistic to say we're going to keep at it. And in 5 years, I think we'll still be doing it. And we've actually committed additional capital. Our CEO, David Solomon, announced in December another $250 million to get to another 10,000 entrepreneurs.
That's fantastic. You know, and I certainly appreciate your comment about the false dawn, because quite honestly, history would suggest that it could potentially be, but let's be hopeful. And I think that there may be, when you think about history, there are a lot of things that we're seeing a little bit play out a little bit differently. That's much more favorable in terms of the impact it's having on the community, and in some respects, an awakening for folks. So
An awakening, exactly.
Let's just be hopeful. So from an ROI perspective, had the initiatives, the programs produced the projected ROI for Goldman Sachs, as well as expected outcomes for the communities and the owners?
Yes, so that's, if there's anything that Goldman does, and you know as well, is tracking and metrics. And so what we do is 6 months after the entrepreneur takes the course, we go in, we do a review. We do a review a year after. We go back 18 months after. So we continually track the entrepreneur and their progress throughout. And the data is really fantastic. 67% of entrepreneurs grow their revenue. Almost 70% of them add employees. They open a different additional stores or facilities on the back of taking the course. So much so that Harvard came knocking on our door a number of years ago to say, we want to do a case study
Wow.
on 10,000 small businesses. And you can see this online on what are you guys doing in this course that produces these results, not only in the short term, but 18 months, 2 years later, you're seeing these businesses grow. Now, to be clear, businesses have been, as we all know, super small businesses at the epicenter of the pandemic. Seeing these entrepreneurs and what they've really, the resilience that they've demonstrated, a day doesn't go by where I'm not talking to one of our 10,000 small businesses graduates or somebody that's in class, or we have the program in the UK, we've just launched in France. And so it's a lot of dialogue about what's happening in your business. In the early days of the pandemic, I said, team, let's go out and call all of our entrepreneurs. And so we were robocalling entrepreneurs to say, what's happening in Rhode Island, what's happening in Chicago, to really find out what's happening with these businesses. What we found is that relatively few businesses have closed who were part of this program as a result of the pandemic.
That's a great metric.
That was something that both Warren and Mike wanted to know, like, you know, what's happening with our entrepreneurs. And I think part of it is really the network, the resiliency, the growth as a result of, one, their own tenacity, let's be clear, but also the systems that they had in place as a result of being part of the program. And frankly, that network that they have in place as being part of the program were really one of the buffers that really helped them to be able to withstand. But look, the game is not over. You know, we've got months to go. And so we're staying very close to our entrepreneurs.
You know, many would argue that investing in women and underrepresented groups requires shifting away from focusing on generating returns. One, do you agree? Which I know you're going to say no. And how does this perception impact the value and, more importantly, the valuation of these businesses?
You know, it absolutely affects the valuation of these businesses, because it becomes something that you're trying to overcome. So walking into the room, there's a certain perception. And so as a result of that, you're sort of several steps behind before the dialogue's even begun. We're looking to change that, but that's the reality of very many entrepreneurs tell me that are part of this conversation. We've got a terrific entrepreneur, and what she says is, you know, the worst time to call a banker is when you need money. And that in fact, you know, when you need to call a banker is when you don't need a thing, when you're developing that relationship. And that's one of the, you know, the key things that we tell our entrepreneurs. We're going to try to connect you with individuals that are going to get to know you, right? And a lot of this is relational, as much as we try to get away from it. That's why I think a lot of these systems are so hard to break, because they're really relational. So we have to get people that are not usually in relation with each other, and in community with each other, and invested in each other. So that day when the person comes knocking to say, I need help for my business, or I've got this new investment idea, that door is then open. And so that's one of the things that we've been working on. And so, yes, there's this perception that it's somehow philanthropy, or you're doing the business a favor, or you're doing a good deed as a result of investing in these businesses. And what they'll tell you is, I don't need favors. I need somebody who understands my business and sees what I'm looking to do and build. And if you have questions, hard questions about my business, I want to answer those for you, because I can play on a level playing field. I need that opportunity. Give me that opportunity.
Excellent points. In the context of gender lens investing, is there any difference that should be emphasized when evaluating women in underrepresented groups, businesses, and if so, why? And what would those differences be? And if not, why not?
You know, I think really understanding their products, which is something that I didn't understand before working with a number of entrepreneurs. Depends on the kinds of products that they have. But, you know, I was dealing with an entrepreneur that had a product that was for Black women, Black hair. And she said part of it was just really explaining, you know, why it is this particular product was going to be helpful. And so I think there can be differences unequivocally. And I think one of it is potentially a knowledge gap around the market and the product that I think investors may need to get their heads around. And that goes back to then having diverse teams, because if you have that diverse team, you know, you're going to have individuals, they're going to be like, okay, I totally get this. Here's what you need to know, right? And so it all is this, to me, it is a wonderful virtuous opportunity. You have a diverse team, you have different voices at the table, opportunities that come in, you can recognize the value of those opportunities more. Like it's almost like open the door to you, as you said before, Donna, and I loved it, have the awakening, because there's opportunity on the other side of that.
Right. Oftentimes, businesses owned by women and the underrepresented groups are over mentored and undercapitalized, which is a terrible combination. And even though a focus of this summit, specifically our speed vesting event scheduled for tomorrow, is intended to create access to capital for founders, at Health Venture, we believe that shifting the control of capital is the ultimate goal to address this misallocation. Would you agree? And is this what you are seeing in your work and in the data?
Yes, I would agree, Donna. And I would say a couple of things on the back of what you've just said. It's one thing to mentor someone, it's another thing to sponsor them and advocate for them. Absolutely. And put your money where your mouth is. And so very often, you ask individuals, they're happy to, give advice, but not open their virtual Rolodex or Instagram or whatever it is that they're using, and they're not willing to do that. And so as we enter into dialogue, we say, look, this is not, yes, mentoring is important. It should continue. It's inspirational. It's helpful. It's all of that. But these businesses need capital. I'll give you one finding from our study. We did a study of all of our business owners that had participated in 10,000 small businesses. And we looked to figure out whether there were any differences along sort of Black business owners and white business owners. And what we found, and across gender as well. And what we found is that Black women business owners were the most educated of the entire group, right? Over 80% of them, of small business owners in our program, had at least a bachelor's degree. And some of them had advanced degrees of Black women who had started these businesses. However, they were returning 47 cents on the dollar for their majority white-owned businesses, and we're like, well, what's going on in this equation? They were mentored. They got lots of great mentoring, right? But it didn't translate into giving them the capital that they needed in order to grow their business, where people are wanting to put money on the table to help them to really expand their business. And so I really agree with you on this over-mentored and undercapitalized. I'd rather it be like, lots of mentoring and give me a lot of capital as well in order to grow my business. So I don't want to poo-poo mentoring at all. I just want some capital for these business owners.
That's funny, but it's so on point. I mean, that would be the optimal position to be in. What strategies has Goldman Sachs employed to affect the change necessary to advance founders? Specifically, what, if any, strategy does Goldman Sachs have for supporting more underrepresented fund managers?
Yes, so we launched a program called Launch with Goldman Sachs. Initially, it's a $500 million investment to invest in managers as well as founders that are women. That was then expanded with a Black and Latinx cohort to really expand that across racial and ethnic lines as well. And, so far we've invested over, I think it's 400, the team will have to correct me if I'm wrong, 400 million of that amount has already been invested. And so we're looking to, really continue that, but we're putting our money where our mouth is. There's not much, we're talking it up. We're doing it in terms of not IPOing a company. We're doing it in terms of launch. We're doing it in terms of 10,000 women. We're doing it in terms of 10,000 small businesses. We've launched a fund for racial equity. So what you're seeing is a real commitment across the commercial aspects of our business, not just the philanthropic aspects of our business, to really move the needle on this. And we're excited about it. You've got, behind me is a whole army of people who are excited and committed to this and working even harder to make it happen. And we've got the sponsorship and leadership from the very top of the organization and David Solomon in helping to get that done.
That's awesome. You talked earlier about the impact based on COVID on businesses in general. And you mentioned the programs that you're responsible for in terms of the small businesses and founding startups. Can you give us some feedback around how the pandemic has had an impact or maybe notable impact on female entrepreneurs as compared to maybe their male counterparts? Have you seen any distinction? Is the data telling you that there's any differential between the two? Is there disproportionate impact or no impact at all? Can you give us some sense around that?
Sure. I mean, as I like to say, women are disproportionately the essential workers. So they're, essential at their day job, whether it's whether they're on the front lines or whether it's running their business. They're essential in the home with homeschooling and doing all the classes on Zoom, and they're essentially exhausted, is what they tell me, right? So it's this trifecta in the ways that they've been impacted as a result of the pandemic. Look, what I've seen is this. Some businesses that are women-led, in particular, some have had to close. I don't know if more have had to close than male-led businesses, but I certainly have examples of female-led businesses that have had to close. People have pivoted their strategy for the most part, though, because when I talk to entrepreneurs, what they tell me is, I don't want to close. I've put my heart and my soul into doing this. And so what they've done is they've really pivoted their strategy. So what's interesting, I'll give you one example of one that used to do huge corporate events and weddings, and she's doing now micro weddings. And so, she'll do she'll come to your backyard. She'll come to the public space where, weddings are happening or other events, or people are doing birthday parties, the kinds of events that she had never previously done before, and really sort of bringing it there. So we've seen a lot of pivoting. If there's a major story, we've seen that the story is the pivot. And really adapting your business to the circumstance. And that's one terrific example of the kind of events. And here's the thing, Donna, she said, I'm not going back. When the pandemic's over, the relationships that I now have in these smaller events that I've been able to build, who've then, passed my name on to any number of other individuals, has been fantastic. And so that's been, I think, one of the key things. Goldman Sachs has also launched, and I have to mention this, a advocacy platform. It's called 10,000 Small Business Voices. And it gets to this exact point that you raised, Donna, which is around what are the needs of these entrepreneurs? What are we hearing in terms of their lived experience? And we conduct surveys of them roughly every 6 to 8 to 12 weeks to figure out, to really be on the pulse of what's happening with their business. David Solomon was in Washington, D.C. On January 5th, just the day before the insurrection. And you'll see, it was a lot of press around all of the 10,000 signs that we put across the Capitol. And these were signs of requests that we were hearing from business owners in terms of what their needs are. So the signs that said things like, obviously they need more capital, they need a liability shield because they're worried about, liability as a result of COVID. They need, greater protections around the safety of themselves and their workers. So there was a whole sort of slew of signs, 10,000 of them across the Capitol, where we're giving them a platform to really be advocates on their own behalf with lawmakers and others. We had a forum with Senator Schumer that I did with a number of business owners. And so that's another way more directly to say, here's what's happening. We want legislators to hear it directly, because the private sector can only do so much. We need to work with the public sector, with policymakers, to really move the needle.
So one of the things that I think is really amazing, and I love the data capture, because the data capture is indisputable.
Yes.
I mean, the facts are what they are. And it's your team is doing clearly quite a bit in that area. And I think that should be the model for other corporations, so they can really see what's happening out here. I mean, these businesses need support. And when you see that what the numbers reflect, again, it's just indisputable. So I think that's fantastic that you guys are really capturing the heart and soul of what's really happening here. If I may dive a little bit more into your background, how has your experience as a woman, a person of color, an immigrant from Guyana, shaped your perspective and how you approach the work of the foundation and what the Office of Corporate Citizenship has set out to do?
Donna, I have to tell you a funny story. Sometimes when I'm at a function or something, people are like, did you always want to, be the president of a foundation or do work in philanthropy or corporate engagement more broadly, my other hat? And what I don't say, but I'll say it to you and your entire audience is, I never thought about working in philanthropy. I never thought I could even afford to work in philanthropy. I always thought of philanthropy and working for a foundation as something that you had to be sort of wealthier to be able to do. I came out of law school and I remember I had $70,000 in debt. It was $73,000 in debt. That was the world of money. It was more than my parents combined had ever made in their entire lives. And I was staring down the barrel of that number, and working in corporate engagement or philanthropy was the furthest thing from my mind. I was thinking I needed to get a job. I need to get a job that paid me as much as humanly possible, because how in heaven's name was I ever going to be able to pay off $73,000 if my parents, working a lifetime and sometimes working 2 jobs, were never able to make that much money in their lives on an annual basis. And so and the other part of it is I've been on the receiving end of so much philanthropy. And so to be able to sit in this seat and to know the transformative power of philanthropy, I feel like I do the job differently as a result of having that experience. I went to Swarthmore College on scholarship, and I know people sometimes would look at my resume in the early days and they saw that I graduated undergrad in 3 years, and they'd be like, "Oh, that's really fantastic, Asahi."
You had to.
And I said, what I wouldn't say to them, I'd let them be, sort of, impressed by that, and I wouldn't say anything. But the truth is this, and I've owned my own truth as I've gotten more senior, is I had to graduate early.
Yes.
Donna. Yeah. My scholarship was running out.
Yeah.
And I needed to double up on classes, because that money, I was not going to go to my parents with, 4 other kids at home and ask them to work even harder and take out more money for me to go to a fancy liberal arts college. And so there was no way I was going to do that. And so I doubled up on classes. And frankly, I would love to have stayed a 4th year. And it was hard. And so I think that perspective of really knowing and being hungry and knowing that, while, from my community, I was one of the few that sort of, was able to achieve what I've achieved, the exceptionalism of it bothers me, because I know in my classes in 4th grade and 5th grade and 6th grade, there were some phenomenal students, far brighter, far better, that didn't get the kinds of opportunities that I was able to get. And part of my commitment and passion around the work that I do is really to try to give more opportunities to more individuals across the spectrum, whether it's in small businesses or the work we do through Goldman Sachs Gives.
We have very similar backgrounds. I think that if no one heard you actually speak or saw you, they would think that that was my story as well, from Temple all the way through law school, the same exact. And it really shapes who you are as a person. And it also shapes the interest that when you see people who are driven, such as the business owners that you work so closely with, that when you see that, you can't help but want to help them.
Yes.
Ways possible. And so from my perspective, I really personally appreciate that, because I don't think when people really understand that journey, and perhaps maybe we don't think it's necessarily that exceptional, we just know what we have to do. And so thank you for sharing that personal story, because I think that is certainly, to me, that's what grounds and shapes sort of the work that I'm seeing that your organization is doing, and the foundation is successful as a result of having you in that role and having that experience. So having said that, what advice would you give our entrepreneurs and founders listening today?
It's a couple of things. One is I wanted to ask you a question, and since it's a fireside chat, I hope I could do that. Sure. Donna, I'm excited to hear about our parallel journeys. Did you tell your journey at the beginning, or was it an evolution for you to be able to share your journey? I'm just curious.
Well, it's interesting because my parents would tell you that when I was 7 years old, I professed that I was going to be a lawyer. And I remember when my father was dying of cancer, and I was an accountant at the time. I worked for J&J. my father said, sweetheart, you said you were going to be a lawyer. And I'm like, Daddy, I'm an accountant. I'm doing pretty well. I'm doing okay. He says, no, you have to honor your word. If you don't honor your word, then your word means nothing. And my father went from 180 pounds to like 90 pounds. And that year I applied to Howard, got into Howard Law, and you know, he passed away in 86. I was in school in 87, and then they decided to do an LLM at Emory. But I will tell you that the journey that I have today, I never thought that I was going to practice law in that way. I always knew that I was going to be on the business side of it. But the trajectory and the journey has just been an amazing one. I think probably for me, the difference or the pivot was after your MBA program. The question was, why a VC? Like, and it really had a lot to do with helping people, helping businesses, helping Black and brown businesses, helping women. Because I saw that there was such a vast distinction, having had the opportunities that I had working at some of the top firms in the world on the accounting side of the house, on the finance side of the house, on the corporate side of the house. But seeing that there was just such a disparity, being like always the only one, always the only female in these finance related roles. And I said, how can I help these businesses? You know, it's not about finding the diamonds in the rough. There are many Black and brown businesses that are, and women entrepreneurs that are just amazing, but they don't have the capital, they don't have the access. And so in my role as co-founder of Health Venture Capital, that's what we do. We educate entrepreneurs. We support them in an education process. I have a 10-week program of entrepreneurship education because I think that's fairly fundamental for our investors to help them really shape and form their innovation. And most of our innovation is our focus is on digital healthcare. But when you look at Black and brown businesses, like you said, they're like the barbershop, they're the hair salon, they're smaller businesses, but they're businesses that are more for the community. I like to see more of the Black and brown and women entrepreneurs in the digital space, in the technology space, because that's clearly the evolution of where we're going as a world. And so, you know, our practice is a global one. I'm very proud of what we've done to support Black and brown entrepreneurs and women. I actually came up with the LeadHERs Summit 3 years ago. And the reason why I came up with the LeadHERs Summit was because of the fact that you saw women who were, I was in Beijing, China at a pitch competition. We hosted a pitch competition at Yale Beijing Center. There were 20 teams. There was only one team where the woman was front facing and actually gave the pitch.
Wow.
That's when I said LeadHERs. That's why it's spelled the way it is. Our goal is to support women and entrepreneurs who are focused and particularly in digital healthcare, but in technology. But that clearly has transcended into working with academic institutions, specifically in New Haven, to work with Black and brown entrepreneurs outside of the digital healthcare space. So it's continually morphs. Yeah, I feel that the work that we're both doing is critically important to closing wealth gaps. And so I just feel called to that, and I'm enjoying the work that I'm doing.
Oh, it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal to listen to you and to see that all that you're doing and driving and hear your commitment to it, because it comes across, it's really, it's palpable. I think it's fantastic. Thank you.
For the investors, Asahi, who are participating on the call and who will also be participating for speed testing tomorrow, what is the call to action for them? What can more investors, or what more can investors do?
You know, I think it's a couple of things. One is, I think, really widen your scope of the individuals that are coming to you. You know, that you may get this inbound, and I frequently do, where the person has no contact, no connection. It's a cold letter that comes in that says, would you consider X, Y, or Z? And the team will sometimes preference, this person came from here and this was referred through this person. And I said, look, let's open our window for this person who says, I saw you on LinkedIn and I'd like to be part of the program. And they have zero connection whatsoever. Otherwise, how are we going to broaden our base of individuals? Now, some of those, may not be a road that we want to go down. And ultimately, we find that as well. But as a discipline, it's one of the things that, I've told my team is some of those that come in, I want us to go through every single one of those because there could be something fantastic in there and they just didn't come through Donna or somebody else that we know. And as a result of that, so that would be one very, very practical thing that, I would tell investors. I think get educated, as I've described, get more educated about diverse markets. I think that would be our entrepreneurs speaking, for them. That's something that they've, underscored with me any number of times. I think the third thing is people can sometimes pull back when they're bumpy, things get a little bit bumpy. And a number of entrepreneurs have said, stay the course with me. And I know that it may be difficult at some times, but it would be that way in other businesses. But they kind of worry that the initial enthusiasm then wanes as somehow it gets a little bit bumpy across the road, and sort of staying with them through the length of through the length of it, even when it gets bumpy, and not sort of abandoning them, if you will, has been another thing that investors businesses have said. So I wanted to convey their messages.
Finally, Asahi, what specifically would you want the women listening to know and internalize relevant to the work that they're doing in the male-dominated spaces, specifically in the areas of technology and entrepreneurship?
As I always say, walk in your power. I try on a daily basis to walk in my power. I feel like, instead of seeing my gender or my race as something that I have to work against, that's not the way that I enter the world. I've got something tremendous to offer the world and Goldman Sachs, and I have every confidence in that in the day that I go about my daily business. And I believe that to my core. So this isn't something I need to overcome. This is something I need to give to others in order to advance the projects and the work that I'm doing. So it's a mindset shift. I remember growing up, and you probably heard the same thing from your parents as well, which is you've got to work harder, you've got to do more, and everything else. Look, I have worked harder. I don't know if I have. I believe I've worked hard. I don't know if I've worked harder. But as well, I'm sort of leaving that behind in the sense of saying, I've done the work. Now it's about really sort of, with courage and fearlessly and unapologetically entering these spaces and making my voice known, not watering down the journey, contributing. And by the way, you find you get a tremendous reaction on the other side. I'm not pusillanimous. I'm not asking permission to be at the table. I've got something to offer. And people know that, whether you're entering with that sense of self or not, because in certain subtle ways, you're conveying it.
Again, Asahi, thank you for sharing your invaluable insights. We appreciate you, the incredible work that you're doing, and the impact that you and Goldman Sachs is making in the underrepresented entrepreneurship community. The call to action is to get more investors on boards and not only supporting entrepreneurs, but investing in underrepresented fund managers as well. Through your efforts and contributions, we're making significant strides toward closing the wealth gaps. Walk in your power. I love it. Asahi Pompey, Global Head of Corporate Engagement and President of the Goldman Sachs Foundation. Thank you, Asahi.
Donna, I thank you. Thank you so much.